No mai, haere mai, welcome to More Than Theology. I'm Richard Goodwin, and church at home is something that we're all becoming quite familiar with in this COVID era. A lot of us have been gathering with other believers in our living rooms or even just streaming services online. And so today we've got a couple of experts in home church. That's Sarah and Nick Field. Sarah and Nick are well known in the Wellington area or nationally as pastors in the Wellington area, but have relatively recently launched a new initiative, a network of home churches called The Way. So Nick, Sarah, welcome to More Than Theology. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks.
Great to be with you, Richard.
Good to be here.
Now, you haven't always been involved in home churches, so tell us a little bit about what you were doing before launching The Way.
Yeah, cool. I laughed when you said we're experts in it. Like, we have literally launched and we're learning as we're going. So we stepped out of 24 years of leading the Street Church, which is a church in the centre of Wellington. And we'd been doing that for 24 years. And then last May, we stepped out of that to pursue this vision of planting a network, a collective of home churches.
Yeah. From the outside, it might look like it's a response to COVID, but that's not the case, is it? So tell us a little bit about how this vision was birthed in you.
Yeah. COVID was a great opportunity. We love it when we get an unexpected opportunity that we can respond to as God's people, as missionaries in the world. And I think probably, we look back even further though from COVID and think about the kinds of questions that we were asking ourselves. And although COVID gave us the opportunity to deep dive into those questions and reform some of our thinking and practice, the questions existed prior to that. And a couple of key questions. The first one was, what is the very, very best way that we as Christ followers in our time and in our place, what's the very, very best way that we can help all Christ followers to become missional, multiplying Christ followers? So it's the question of the how in that, and the second question that used to rattle around in our minds and between us as well was, does it really have to be this complicated? Yeah, and I guess we kind of combined those two questions with the gift of time that COVID gave us and began to really look as deeply as we possibly could into that question.
So we using that time, we did things like we read through the Gospels together. We read through the Book of Acts. We then followed up with a good dose of Ephesians, and we were looking at it and saying, if you had a blank sheet of paper, or you were like the early Christians, what would church look like? And what are the key things that you need to focus on? And the more that we dug into that, the more we were beginning to get this real sense of vision, of core, of actually, we need to simplify. And we need to simplify in such a way where we can unleash a movement of missionaries here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Yeah, you talked about being inspired by, reading through books of the New Testament. And, when I was doing theological study, I did a course called The First Urban Churches. And it was really about home church. Home church is not a new thing. It's sort of the first form of church. So what is it about that style of church and, 21st century Aotearoa culture that you think makes it really work and resonate?
Yeah, I think a number of things. First one would be there is this desire for people to be more connected in community.
Right.
And when we think about it, the way that happens best is in a smaller group. I mean, our relational capacity is actually not as big as what people would lead you to believe. And so therefore, if you have a smaller group of people that you're really sort of going for, that enables you to really develop that community. But more than that, it's not so much about community as it is about mission. And one of the things that we were inspired by looking back on the early church and challenged by today is how do you have smaller groups of people in the place where they live, work and play. So in your neighbourhood, with your neighbours, with those people closest to you, where you're engaging and developing relationships in a meaningful way. And I think what we're seeing in society is we've gone through the era of the commuter, lifestyle where you don't know your neighbour, you simply drive in your garage, you shut the door and you're there.
Mm.
Now, I think COVID has done this to some extent, but I think there's also just that yearning in people's hearts that people want to, lean across the fence and understand who their neighbours are. So there's an incredible opportunity there. And so as followers of Jesus, we need to pivot that too and say, well, we want to engage in that place as opposed to disappearing, 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes drive away to go to church.
Well, you really bring up a really fascinating point. I can't remember where I was reading, but I was reading recently about the rise of the mega church really being linked to the commuter lifestyle, that people got so used to driving 30, 45 minutes to work that driving 30, 45 minutes to a church that had, great coffee and great music wasn't such a big deal. Now the push is, people working from home and discovering the kind of joys that come with that. It makes sense that people's worlds might shrink a little bit in terms of where they're driving to or not. And maybe the home church model just kind of goes hand in hand with a bit more of a home-centric kind of lifestyle. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So how is a home church really different to a cell group or a life group or a home group or whatever word, the audiences churches are using? What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something we've pondered deeply. I think if we think about the, if you like, conventional form of church that we are, probably most of us are familiar with and have spent time in, the main commitment that a person makes when they become a part of such a church is really to that Sunday gathering, which is a church service. So they commit time-wise, energy-wise into that. They're committing to serve in that space of time and place, and that becomes the place and the energy output time for them where they also receive, and that's kind of like priority number one. And within that or beside that, and it just depends, you commit to volunteering somewhere, so serving on a team, and so that's sort of your second commitment. And then your third commitment is to a smaller group, and that might be your cell group or your Bible study group or your home group, whatever it is. And so what we've seen is that even although we may, as a church, we may achieve a high level, a really great proportion of people who are in a life group or in a cell group, how often they're there is a whole other question. And if the statistics are right and most people are attending a church service, those people who are committed to a church are attending a church service approximately every third, or a little bit less than that, every third Sunday. If that's their top priority, then how often are they actually actively engaged then in their cell group? And why is that even an important question? Who cares? I think it's an important question because when we look at how people grow, they grow best when they are in a dialogue situation, and a situation which has true relationship. And even where food is involved, where there's a fellowship element, where you are known and you're all on the front row.
Right.
Well, that kind of describes a well-functioning cell group, doesn't it? So if that's where, if our first energy is going into services, and that's every sort of third Sunday or so over the course of a year, a second energy potentially is going into serving somewhere, and our third energy is going into the place that makes the most difference. That's got to raise questions for church leaders.
One of the things that became really uncomfortable for us is we looked at that, and then we do a bit of a back of an envelope assessment on it, and you realise that in your church, probably 80% of your finances, your resource, your staff, and your energy goes into producing the Sunday experience and all the machinery that's around that, and 20% goes into the cell group sort of structure. And I wrote that's a generalization, but it smells about right.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, 80% of the energy and focus is going into something that produces only 20% of the spiritual growth and transformation. So it just made sense for us. This is hilarious. We're going to fly over our camera. So that's great. So if you look at it, we just thought, well, what happens if you flip it? And you therefore put the energy and the focus into that which produces the most spiritual transformation.
No, I really love that.
By the way.
Yeah, I love it. There seems to be some real potential benefits of home church for families, and I'm basing this reflection on a book that I read recently called The Spiritually Vibrant Home by Don Everts, but it was based on some research done by the Barna Institute in the US, looking at what makes a spiritually vibrant home and the sort of home where the faith kind of the parents is really infectious and is passed on to the children. And they identified three things, and I think the first two are not particularly, they're not rocket science. Spiritual disciplines, engaging in spiritual disciplines together as a family, prayer and Bible reading, faith conversations, being willing to have those conversations as a family. And the third one was practicing hospitality, and that being a really high priority where people are just drifting in and out of the home. You're having them for meals. You might even have someone living with you for a year or more, and just sort of quite open doors, blurry boundaries between who's family and who are friends. It's sort of whānau. It seems to me that that's probably what a good home church kind of creates. Can you just tell us a little bit of what you see maybe some of the benefits are of home church for families looking to grow in their faith?
Yeah, look, doesn't the average heart just yearn for what you've just described?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's absolutely magical. It's beautiful. It's incredible, and there's something deep within us that says, "I want that," and that it just feels right. So there's something within us, I think, that resonates. But also, I'd be fascinated if we could pick up some of the people from the early church that we read about in the Bible, and we could drop them into a modern day church context. Say church service and kids programs and all that, I don't think they'd recognise it.
No, it's a good point.
Yeah, and I think that when we've got so used to looking at other churches, and often mega type churches, for leading us in what we are to be and do, but it's really a great idea to go right back and look at what did Jesus do when it came to generational? What did he do when it came to relationships? What did he do when it came to discipleship? What did he teach about the kingdom? What metaphors did he use? How did he do it? What was his context within which he taught and ministered and built relationship? And we see home, we see family, we see people, we see friends, we see what you've described as this bunch that, who's a brother, who's a sister? Oh, heck, we all are, right? And this is a little person, he's a big person. And then we travel that through, and of course the people that he did that with started the church. Well, it's going to look a whole lot like it looked with Jesus, and that's exactly what we see in the early church. And the fun thing right now is that we get to take a moment to really go back and look at that early church and say, let's learn from them, as opposed to learn from the the hundreds and hundreds of years of iterations of moving away from that. Why don't we come back to that?
One of the things that we think about is, in our current sort of model of church, it's like we're outsourcing the discipleship of all the various age demographics. So you send your kids off, you send the youth off, you send your seniors off, and it's like it's all about splitting the ages, because we've bought into this idea that each age has its own individual needs that cannot be met if they're all together, and therefore they would get lost. Whereas you look at it biblically, and you look at it relationally, and you look at it in terms of family, nothing could be further from the truth. And so one of the things that we're discovering and leaning into is exactly those points that you talked about in that book. And we've had parents, because we have kids in the home church sort of running now, from like three weeks old through to about 17, and you're finding parents are starting to lean into the realization that actually I'm responsible for the discipleship of my family, and that's therefore for each other if there's a couple, definitely for their kids, and they're beginning to see the benefit of that. So we're trying to support that, and we're at the beginning of the journey, but even things like having a daily Bible reading plan, and we've actually set one up which uses the Action Bible, and so kids could be reading that, parents are reading the same passage in the day, and then they get to talk about it, so they have those spiritual conversations over the dinner table. And we're trying to go down the line of, let's not set up another program that you have to purchase or buy or sign up for. But what are some of the rhythms of life that are that are already there? You can actually tweak and change so that they actually have that spiritual discipleship component to it.
Yeah, rhythms of life. I really love that. Recently, reading something by it's an old essay by a Maori minister. His name was Ruawai Rakina, and he talked about when the missionaries first came to Aotearoa, the style of faith that they modelled and ultimately had Maori convert to was a very sort of Sunday centric, building centric kind of faith. Not mega churches, but nevertheless very much focused around a Sunday morning service. And it left the term he used was a religious void for Maori, because for Maori, their spirituality was woven into the rhythms of life. And all of a sudden that was taken away and replaced with a Sunday morning, and it took away a lot. And what you're describing, I can see, is something that where faith more naturally perhaps gets worked into the rhythms of life, rather than being a Sunday morning thing and then the rest of your life feels just like everyone else's. So I love the potential of that. When I think about this home church prospect and try to imagine myself in it, there's so much that appeals about it. But I tell you, the thing that freaks me out is the thought of like fostering friendships, getting to know neighbors and all that sort of thing. And then getting to that moment where you go, oh, do you want to come in to my place and do church or something like that? It sort of feels like, oh, that'd be a really hard leap to make. And, Kiwis, we don't, I think faith is something we don't love to talk about. At least we feel it's a bit private, a little bit taboo sometimes. So talk to us a little bit about how do you get from sort of friendship to doing church together?
Yeah. Oh, Richard, it's so exciting. I mean, if you could imagine your church, the church that you're fellowshipping with imagine if within the rhythm of a month, 1 week every month was totally devoted, 100% of the energy was put towards encouraging each other as believers in evangelism, praying for each other, teaching each other, encouraging each other, checking in with the stories, celebrating the stories, encouraging next steps. Every single month, the other stuff was put away, and that was what you did together, and that was given, top priority. If you imagined what the church might look like after 6 of those months, after 12 of those months, that body of believers, what might happen through that? And so with what we're doing with the way, that's what we've done. We've said, look, this is of absolute importance. And so we have done exactly that. And every 4th week, that's all we're all about, which means that the other 3 weeks change. Yeah, they change dramatically. And so we begin to be so much more active in our own neighborhood relationships, our work relationships, our fun relationships, our family relationships. We train people in how to have those conversations, and it's just not all that complicated. To say to a friend who may be a neighbour or a workmate that you're having coffees with or going for walks with or whatever, to say to them on a walk, so tell me your God story, and then to listen and learn is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. That leads really, really naturally into you telling your God story to someone. Which leads really, really naturally into saying to that person, would you like to catch up and have a look at the Bible and see the story of Jesus? I'd love to just show it to you if you're interested, and see where that goes. So the first step may not be, would you like to come along to the gathering of the home church on a particular time? Sure. Much more of it may actually be sort of the background work that you're just gently learning about someone, and then taking the opportunity to explain Christ and explain your story. And then it's not such a big leap. It's your home, or you're going to someone's home together, and it's just in the neighbourhood. It's not such a great leap.
And the principle in behind that is, if you think of the way Jesus did it with his disciples, the training was very much in the trenches. And I think what we've tended to focus on more is how do we inspire people to have that evangelistic conversation, invite people to church. What we're saying is, that's fine. But the important thing is let's train you, and then let's continue to coach and walk alongside you and encourage you when it doesn't go well, and when it does, to celebrate it and what can you learn. So it becomes something which is ingrained, as opposed to sort of this unattainable. I have no idea how to get there.
Yeah. I think for a long time, you talked a little bit about sometimes we've taken our cues from mega churches, and there's been maybe a sort of equating of professionalism and excellence with being a sort of attractive gospel package, if you like. And obviously, I'm imagining at least home church is probably not all that slick. It's probably very rough around the edges and just sort of natural. Have we got it wrong, do you think? Is what's more attractive just sort of authenticity rather than something slick?
Isn't it interesting that we'd heard this many times over the years, and I think most church leaders probably have, where every now and then someone will say to you, I just wish it was more real or was more authentic. Well, what do they mean by that? I think there is a sense of it can feel so slick that it doesn't feel real. And I mean, I think as pastors, you always want to do the very, very best you can. So it's not that you're being inauthentic in that. It's just that the demands of leading a room full of 50, 100, 500 people demands a certain level of programming and of getting it right. Whereas what a home church does is it says, actually, that doesn't matter. And, you can have a situation where, oh man, I really have in my heart, I'd love to sing this song. Does anybody know how it goes? No idea. Does anyone have Spotify? Yeah, sure. Let's click it on Spotify. And then you just watch the Holy Spirit just melt people in worship, because that was actually what the Spirit was prompting people to do. And it may have taken longer than the 4 minutes and 35 seconds that the song allowed in the program, but there is no program. You're simply going with what the Spirit's doing in terms of the relationship and the conversation. And I think you're right. I think it is more real. That being said, and some of us have said, I can't wait at some point, once we can get rid of these sort of restrictions on numbers, the joy of just singing and worshiping with a whole group of people. There's something profound in that, and even that, one of the things we're looking at is how do you do that, and having celebrations where you're bringing home churches together, so you're not throwing it all out, but you're saying, let's get the best of both.
Yeah, love that. In the age of COVID, I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people have been forced into sort of some form of home church. Do you have any particular advice for people that are in conventional churches but are, given the situation, having to work with homes and living rooms and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing would be to come to the most important question. And it's not that the most important question is not, goodness, how do we do sort of the same thing but in a smaller setting and raise up enough people to do it? In my mind, that's a bit of a missed opportunity. But really the most important question is, how do we help to form missional multiplying disciples in this moment? So if small settings is the setting, how do we best form missional multiplying disciples? And let's not miss the opportunity. Potentially this is an opportunity for churches to totally rethink the forms that they've been accustomed to, that have really only been formed in recent time, in the last hundreds of years. And it's a chance to really, really go back and look at the original church, the people who Jesus walked with and asked to set up the church, and look at what did they do, what did it look like, and how could this be transferable into our time right now, in a really unique opportunity that we've got.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. If listening to this conversation, people, our listeners, are feeling inspired to get involved, start a home church or hook into a home church or something like that, how can this initiative that you've started, support them in that?
Yeah, cool. We so what you can jump onto our website and just have a look at what we're doing. It's theway.co.nz. And then what we do is we'll work with individuals or we'll work with churches, and we can talk through what it might look like to set up a home church in your area. We provide training, and that's over a number of sessions, and really give a good grounding in sort of the philosophy of it, and also the tools you need to actually make it work. And then there's ongoing coaching. We have a thing we've called the Way Collective, where leaders from the home churches, we call them shepherds, would gather together once a month on a Zoom call, and so we provide ongoing coaching for people through that format and other ways too. So we'd love to help. We'd love to help people reach out.
Great. So that was theway.co.nz. So if you're interested in getting involved with The Way and connecting with Sarah and Nick, then that's where you can find them on the web. Fields, it's been great to have you on the podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I feel genuinely inspired. We had a little pre-podcast conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I just can't shake this idea, a simple idea and an ancient idea, but one that feels really resonant at this moment. So I'm so glad that you two are spearheading this initiative, and it's just been a real joy to have you on the podcast and have this conversation. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Richard.
Great chatting.
Yeah, wonderful.
Ka kite anō.
Ka kite.